The alien plea, the message began as nothing more than a whisper in the void, a signal weak and broken drifting through endless darkness. It carried no strength, no power, only desperation. It was the voice of a dying world. On the planet called Xylaris, fire had consumed the skies. Cities that once shone with light now burned in silence. Great towers fell like paper before the invading fleet. The people of Xylaris were not warriors. They had built their lives on peace, on science, on trade. They had trusted their treaties, their alliances, and the strength of their neighbors. But when the enemy came, no ally came with them. The invaders were merciless. Their ships hung over the planet like vultures, casting shadows that swallowed whole continents. Their weapons reduced forests, seas, and cities into ash. They did not fight for land nor for survival. They fought only for conquest. And so, in their final moments of hope, the people of Xylaris did what no one thought they would dare. They sent a call, a cry for help cast into the dark. It was not aimed at anyone in particular. It was not meant for Earth. It was only meant to reach someone, anyone who might care enough to listen. The call traveled for days, then weeks, then months. It crossed stars, past silent stations, and brushed past the territories of ancient empires. Yet no one answered. The great councils of the galaxy heard it. The powerful fleets of nearby systems detected it. But they all turned away. The enemy was too strong, too dangerous. To answer the call was to invite death. The galaxy watched in silence as Xylaris was slowly torn apart. To them it was another forgotten war, another weak people destroyed. But the call did not die. It kept moving deeper into the void, and finally, far beyond the borders of the familiar stars, it reached a world that had long been ignored, a world that many called cursed, a world that had earned a name whispered with both fear and respect. Earth. The signal was weak when it arrived. Broken words, scattered images, fragments of voices that spoke of fire, screams, and despair. But even broken, the meaning was clear. A people were begging for help. They were asking for someone to hear them before it was too late. On Earth, the message did not fall on deaf ears. Humans listened. They studied the fragments, pieced together the meaning, and understood. And as they listened, something stirred within them. It was not fear. It was not hesitation. It was something older, deeper. For humans were children of a death world. They had grown on a planet that had tried to kill them since their first breath. The storms, the beasts, the hunger, the cold, Earth had never been kind. It had forged them into something hard, something relentless. Where other species built comfort, humans built survival. And when they heard the cry of Xylaris, they remembered what it meant to fight against despair. Across the oceans of Earth, debates began. In the great councils of human nations, voices clashed. Some asked why they should risk their fleets for strangers who had never cared for them. Others said it was a trap, a trick to pull them into another war. But there were also voices that spoke with fire. They said no cry for help should be ignored. They said humanity knew what it meant to be abandoned, and they would not abandon others. The debate lasted hours, then days. Yet the outcome was never truly in doubt. For humanity had changed since entering the stars. They had seen the galaxy, they had seen its cruelty, and they had seen its fear of them. And still they chose to stand. The decision was made. Earth would answer. In the void above Earth, engines roared. Warships that had slept in their docks came alive once more. Great vessels rose from shipyards, their hulls black with iron, their weapons burning with silent fire. They were not the largest ships in the galaxy. They were not the oldest. But they carried something no other fleet possessed. They carried the spirit of Deathworlders. On the bridge of the flagship, a voice spoke, cold and clear. "We heard your call. We will answer." And with those words, the Armada began to move. The people of Xylaris did not yet know. They still looked to their burning skies and saw only despair. They still whispered prayers into the smoke of their ruined homes, waiting for an end they could not stop. To them, the call had been lost. Their voices had gone unheard. But far away, across the sea of stars, Deathworlders had risen. And when humanity rose, the galaxy trembled. The plea had been heard. The answer was coming. The awakening of Earth's Armada in. The high orbit above Earth, silence broke. Giant hangars opened like the mouths of beasts, and the sleeping ships inside stirred for the first time in years. Their black hulls, scarred from old wars, reflected the pale light of the sun. To many who watched from the ground, it felt as if the planet itself was exhaling, releasing its hidden guardians back into the void. The decision had been made. and it spread through every command center, every shipyard, and every crew quarter. Humanity would answer the call. The alien plea had crossed the stars and reached the most unlikely of listeners, and now the Deathworlders were rising. Soldiers and engineers worked without rest. Hangars thundered with the sound of loading weapons and fuel. Massive rail guns were lifted into position, their barrels as long as towers. Plasma lances hummed with deadly light, casting eerie glows against steel walls. Every corridor shook as engines powered up, making the ground tremble beneath the workers' boots. The Armada was more than ships. It was a memory of Earth's long struggle. Every hull carried scars, every weapon bore names etched by human hands. They were not polished machines built for glory. They were survivors forged by necessity, shaped by desperation, and hardened by the truth that humans had never been given anything without a fight. The people of Earth gathered at ports, cities, and space elevators to watch. Children lifted their eyes to the skies, their faces glowing with awe as the great ships drifted upward. Old veterans stood silently, their hands tight against canes, recognizing the sound of war returning. Across continents, billions felt the same strange weight in their chests, a mix of fear, pride, and something darker. In command halls, screens lit up with the faces of leaders. Some still argued against the mission, warning that the enemy would be too strong, that humanity would bleed for a people who might never thank them. But the voices of caution were drowned beneath a louder truth. Humanity had always fought impossible battles. They had never waited for gratitude. At the heart of the fleet, the flagship Iron Resolve prepared for launch. Its bridge was wide and cold, filled with the glow of tactical displays. The captain stood tall, his uniform heavy with old honors. His voice carried across the intercom, steady and unshaken. "Crew of the Armada," he said, "you know why we rise. Somewhere out there a world is burning. Somewhere out there a people beg for help. The galaxy has ignored them. We will not. We will answer." His words were simple, but they rippled through every deck, every soldier's mind. For a moment no one spoke. Then as one, the fleet came alive with a chorus of responses, voices shouting in unison. Humanity had chosen its path. Beyond Earth, the first engines ignited. The black ships moved, slow at first, then faster, cutting across the void with streaks of light. They flew in formation, their dark silhouettes forming a wall against the stars. Each vessel carried more than weapons. Each carried a crew who knew what it meant to survive storms, famine, disease, and war. Each carried the spirit of Deathworlders. In distant systems, alien observers watched with unease. Signals spread across the galaxy as news traveled. Humanity was moving. The Deathworld Armada was rising. To some, it was a cause for fear. They remembered old wars, the brutal tactics, the relentlessness of humans when pushed. To others, it was a cause for hope. Perhaps at last someone would stand against the enemy no one else dared to fight. On the world of Xylaris, no one yet knew. The skies still burned. The invaders still crushed resistance with cruel laughter. The people still believed their plea had gone unanswered. But far away, the first shadows of their salvation were already cutting through the dark. The Armada grew with every passing hour. More ships joined from colonies and frontier stations. Vessels that had been drifting in quiet patrols now turned their bows toward the rally point. Freighters were stripped and reforged into carriers, loaded with supplies for the long war. Old ships, barely holding together, were patched and fitted with fresh weapons. Humanity had no choice but to use everything it had. In the final hours before departure, the fleet filled the sky above Earth. Thousands of ships, small and massive, floated like a storm waiting to break. They did not look beautiful. They did not look noble. They looked dangerous, sharp, and heavy with purpose. From the surface, the sight was unforgettable. It was as if Earth itself had grown wings of iron. Children whispered stories about the Deathworld Armada, not as machines, but as living giants rising to defend the weak. The galaxy might call them monsters, but to their own people, they were guardians. Inside the flagship, silence fell once more as the final countdown began. The captain looked at his officers, each face hard with resolve. The engines roared, and the void opened before them. The Armada moved, cutting across the dark, leaving Earth behind. And though the people of Xylaris still did not know, their plea had awoken a storm. A storm that carried the wrath of Deathworlders, and once unleashed, it would not stop until the skies of the enemy burned. The galaxy trembled. The awakening had begun. The first encounter. The Armada broke through the dark like a storm of iron. Thousands of ships drifted in silence, their weapons hidden, their engines burning with a steady glow. For days they had traveled across the stars, a shadow spreading wider and wider as more vessels joined. Now at last, they reached the edge of the Xylaris system. What they found was a nightmare. From the viewport of the flagship Iron Resolve, the bridge crew saw the planet below. Flames cut across its surface, cities burning like scattered embers. Great black clouds rose into the atmosphere where oceans boiled and continents cracked under bombardment. Alien screams echoed faintly through intercepted signals, words of despair too broken to understand but heavy with fear. And above the ruined world, the enemy waited. Their fleet hung in orbit like a wall of blades. Hundreds of warships, sleek and sharp, spread across the planet's orbit. Their hulls shone with cold silver, their lights flashing in silent challenge. They did not hide, nor did they fear. To them, Xylaris was already won. The arrival of strangers was no threat. It was only an interruption. On the bridge of the flagship, the crew felt the tension thicken. Some stared in awe at the size of the enemy fleet. Others gripped their controls tighter, steadying their breath. The captain stood tall, his gaze fixed on the sight of the invaders. His voice when he spoke was calm, but beneath it lay iron. "Transmit to the enemy," he ordered. The signal carried across the void. A single message, simple and direct. This world called for help. "We are the answer," the enemy replied with laughter. Cold, sharp, echoing laughter that carried through the comms. Their commander's voice came through filled with mockery. "Humans, Deathworlders, you should have stayed in your cursed corner of the galaxy. This war is none of your concern. Leave now and we may let you crawl back to your dying world." On the bridge, silence followed. Then the captain leaned forward. His eyes, hard as stone, reflected the burning planet below. "You mistake us," he said. "We do not crawl. We do not run. You brought fire to the innocent. Now you will see what happens when Deathworlders rise." The channel closed. For a moment the void was still. The enemy ships held their line, confident and unshaken. The humans adjusted formation, their black ships spreading out like predators encircling prey. Then the first shot was fired. It came from a human railgun, the slug tearing through the darkness faster than sound, faster than thought. It struck an enemy cruiser, ripping through its shields and splitting its hull in two. The explosion lit the void, a sudden burst of fire that marked the true beginning of the battle. The enemy responded at once. Plasma beams cut through space, striking human frigates. One ship burned, then another. Screams filled the comms as human crews fought to hold their lines. But they did not fall back. The Deathworld Armada surged forward. Railguns thundered, plasma lances roared, missiles streaked through the void. Each shot was not only steel and fire, but the weight of centuries of survival. Humans did not fight with beauty. They fought with brutality. They turned the void into chaos. Enemy ships broke under the sudden storm. Their silver hulls cracked, their proud formations shattered. They had expected hesitation, fear, retreat, but the humans fought like no other species. They absorbed hits that would have crippled others, patched wounds mid-battle, and pressed forward no matter the cost. On Xylaris, survivors looked up from their ruined cities. Through smoke and fire, they saw new lights burning in the sky. Not the cold silver of the invaders, but red, gold, and white bursts as the humans fought above. Hope, faint and trembling, flickered in their hearts. Someone had come. Back in orbit, the enemy commander snarled as his ships fell one by one. He ordered them to regroup, to crush the humans quickly. But already doubt spread through their ranks. Reports came of human ships fighting even while aflame, refusing to die until they had taken 2 or 3 enemies with them. The captain of the Iron Resolve gave no pause. He ordered the fleet deeper into the enemy formation, closer to the planet. Every human ship fought not for conquest, not for glory, but to break the chains that held Xylaris under fire. Hours passed, though to those fighting it felt like minutes. The void was a graveyard of burning wrecks. Human ships were scarred, some destroyed, but still they pushed. The enemy was strong, but for the first time they felt the edge of fear. Deathworlders did not fight like anyone else. They did not retreat. They did not yield. They turned the field into fire until only one side was left standing. At last, the human fleet broke through. Their ships surrounded the planet, their weapons cutting down the last of the enemy's orbital blockade. The skies of Xylaris cleared for the first time in months. From the surface, survivors lifted their eyes to see the black silhouettes of human ships. To them, they looked like angels of iron, Wings spread across the stars. The battle was not over. The enemy still had fleets beyond the system. More would come. But for that moment, the people of Xylaris knew they were not alone. Their call had been heard, and the galaxy, watching from afar, realized the same truth. Humanity had answered. Humanity had struck. And when Deathworlders struck, the void itself trembled. The cost of answering, the smoke of battle still hung over Xylaris. Wreckage drifted in orbit. Broken ships tumbling slowly, their fires fading into cold sparks. The first clash was won, but the war was far from over. The Deathworld Armada held the skies, but their victory had come with wounds. Dozens of human ships lay crippled, some burned silently, their crews gone. Others floated barely alive, patched with emergency fields as engineers fought to keep the air from leaking away. On every deck, the cost was felt. Inside the flagship Iron Resolve, the captain stood before a wall of screens. The faces of ship commanders filled the display. Some faces were bloodied, their uniforms torn. Others were only static now, names marked in red. The captain did not flinch. He only nodded once, slow and heavy, before speaking. "We knew this price," he said, "and still we rise." The crew of the Armada carried on. Broken ships were towed into formation. Medical bays overflowed with the wounded, their cries echoing through steel corridors. Surgeons worked with shaking hands, their uniforms stained, their voices hoarse. There was no time for grief. Only time to prepare for the next storm, because the enemy was not finished. From the dark beyond the system, new signals emerged. More fleets, heavier and larger, were rushing toward Xylaris. The invaders had underestimated humans once. They would not again. This time they came with rage, bringing ships that dwarfed mountains, weapons that could shatter moons. The people of Xylaris, watching from their ruined cities, felt hope tremble once more. They asked themselves if the Deathworlders could withstand what was coming. They whispered fears that their saviors would fall like all others. But the humans did not whisper. They prepared. On every ship, crews worked without rest. Engineers welded broken plates while sparks lit the air. Gunners reloaded weapons with bloody hands. Pilots strapped themselves into cockpits, their eyes hollow with exhaustion but burning with fire. These were not soldiers fighting for conquest. These were survivors refusing to let despair win. The second wave came like a tidal storm. Thousands of enemy ships poured into the system, their formations stretching across the void like a wall of blades. Their commander's voice echoed once more, full of venom. "Deathworlders, you cannot hold. You will die here, and the galaxy will remember your weakness." The human reply was silence. Silence until the first shot. Railguns roared again. Plasma fire lit the void. Missiles streaked into the enemy lines. And the second battle began. It was bloodier than the first. Human ships fell one after another, torn apart by the enemy's monstrous weapons. Cruisers shattered into fragments. Carriers burned until their cores exploded, scattering fire across the dark. But even as ships died, their crews did not stop. Some stayed at their posts until their decks crumbled, firing their last shots into the enemy before vanishing in flame. Others rammed their crippled vessels into enemy hulls, turning themselves into weapons of steel and fury. Every loss bought time for another ship to strike harder. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, the captain stood unblinking as reports came in. Frigate down. Destroyer lost. Carrier burning. Each word was a wound. Yet with every loss, the enemy fleet cracked further. The Deathworlders were bleeding, but the invaders were bleeding more. Hours dragged like years. The void became a graveyard, fire and wreckage stretching across the black. Human ships limped, their hulls scarred, but still they pressed forward. They fought with a madness that only survivors of Earth could know, a refusal to die quietly. At last, the tide shifted. The enemy fleet, once confident, broke apart. Their formation collapsed. Ships fled into the dark, their commanders unwilling to lose more to these impossible humans. The people of Xylaris saw it with their own eyes. The invaders who had ruled their skies for months were running. The Deathworlders, broken and battered, still stood, but the cost was everywhere. On the surface of Xylaris, human landing ships descended, bringing medics and supplies. Survivors looked at the humans with awe and sorrow. These were not untouchable gods. They were scarred, weary, and bleeding just like them. Yet they still fought. In the medical bays, soldiers wept for lost comrades. Names were carved into steel walls so they would not be forgotten. In the silence of burned-out ships, the dead floated among wreckage, their faces lit by the glow of ruined stars. The galaxy watched, silent and shaken. No other species would have fought this way. No other people would have thrown themselves into fire for strangers. But the Deathworlders had answered. And they had paid. In the end, the captain of the Iron Resolve looked across the ruined battlefield, his eyes heavy but unbroken. "Remember this," he said to his crew. "Every life we lost bought life for another. This is the cost of answering, and we will pay it again and again until the fire is gone." The words spread across the fleet, carried in whispers and shouts. Humanity did not fight because it was easy. Humanity fought because no one else would. The people of Xylaris, watching their skies clear for the first time, understood. The Deathworlders had come, and even in pain, even in loss, they would not leave until the invaders were gone. The silence after the fire. The battle was over. Above Xylaris, the void was quiet for the first time in months. Wreckage drifted in the dark like broken bones, the remains of ships from both sides. Some still burned, small sparks fading into the endless black. Others floated silently, frozen tombs carrying the dead who had fought until their last breath. The Deathworld Armada lingered in orbit. Their ships were scarred, many held together by patches of emergency fields, their weapons blackened from overuse. Medical beacons flashed across the fleet, marking vessels overflowing with wounded. Yet they were still there. They had not left. They had not broken. From the surface, the people of Xylaris looked upward. For weeks, they had seen only the cold shadows of their enemy. Now they saw something different. Battered silhouettes of human ships standing like guardians in the night sky. To the survivors below, those shapes were more than steel. They were proof that their plea had been heard. In the ruins of a once great city, a young alien child stared at the heavens. Her parents had told her that no one would come, that the galaxy had abandoned them. Yet here, above the smoke, she saw the impossible. The Deathworlders had come. Her small voice whispered words carried by thousands on her planet. They heard us. On the flagship Iron Resolve, silence filled the bridge. The crew, exhausted, sat slumped in their stations. Bandages wrapped their arms, burns scarred their faces, yet their eyes stayed sharp. They had seen friends die. They had seen their own ships torn apart. Still, they remained. The captain looked out across the void. His reflection on the glass showed a man aged by war, his face lined with fatigue but hard as stone. He knew this was not the end. The enemy would return. The galaxy would not forget what had happened here. But for this moment, he allowed himself to breathe. "Signal the surface," he ordered quietly. The message was sent. Across Xylaris, survivors received the broadcast. The voice of a Deathworlder carried through broken radios, cracked screens, and half-destroyed comm towers. "We heard your call. You are not alone. You will never be alone again." The words echoed across the planet, sinking deep into the hearts of those who had lost everything. For the first time since the war began, hope returned. It was fragile, but it was real. Yet beyond Xylaris, far across the galaxy, the silence was heavy with something else. Fear. News of the battle spread like fire. Traders, spies, and wandering ships carried stories of what had happened. They told of how the humans had answered a plea that no one else dared touch. They told of how the Deathworld Armada had thrown itself into a storm of blades and emerged standing. They told of how the enemy, feared by countless empires, had fled before the fury of humans. In hidden councils, alien leaders whispered in unease. If the Deathworlders could break one fleet, could they break others? If they answered one plea, would they answer another? For centuries, humanity had been seen as dangerous, unpredictable, and best left alone. Now they were something worse. Now they were a force that chose when to rise, and when they rose, they did not stop. Some called them saviors. Others called them monsters. All agreed on one truth. The Deathworlders had changed the balance of the galaxy. On the surface of Xylaris, the people began to rebuild. Human medics walked among the wounded, their uniforms torn, their hands stained with both human and alien blood. They shared food, water, and medicine, treating strangers as if they were their own. To the survivors, this was as shocking as the battle itself. Humans did not just fight, they stayed. One elder of Xylaris stood before a crowd of his people, his voice breaking as he spoke. They fought not because we were strong, nor because we could repay them. They fought because we asked, and no one else did. The galaxy will remember this, and so will we. The Deathworld Armada did not celebrate. They did not sing songs of victory or carve statues in their honor. They simply repaired their ships, buried their dead, and prepared for what would come next. For humans understood better than anyone that war never ended with one battle. In the deep dark, enemy fleets regrouped. Their commanders swore vengeance, swore that the humans would pay for their defiance. But for the first time, fear lingered in their voices. They had seen how Deathworlders fought. They had seen how they refused to die. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, the captain watched the stars. His crew stood with him, silent but steady. He did not smile. He did not boast. He only whispered words that carried across his ship, words that became the heart of a legend. Never send a call for help lightly, because if we hear it, we will come, and when we come, fire follows. The galaxy trembled at those words. The plea had been answered. The silence after the fire was not peace. It was the warning before the next storm.